And Vitor is going to, as I mentioned earlier on, he's not going to go through War and Peace, don't worry. He's only got 10 minutes, so he's gone for a shorter book, which is Anna Karenina. So over to you, Vitor, with regards to responsible sourcing and the Anna Karenina principle. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sarah. In fact, mixing Tolstoy and responsible mining seemed a great teaser to attract the audience to this presentation. But just before linking responsible sourcing and Tolstoy, I'd like to share with you two personal stories. And one just happened in one of these meetings in Geneva within a group that is discussing and advancing the United Nations framework classification. So in this meeting that roughly happens once per year in Geneva, there is an expert group, and one colleague there, one of the experts, asked the audience if you could choose one of the Sustainable Development Goals. So you have the 17 now on your screen, but imagine that you are like a kind of superhero and that you could choose just one and implement it. If you could do that, which one would you choose? And of course, you should look for one of these Sustainable Development Goals that is capable of leveraging all the others. So which of these 17 responsible Sustainable Development Goals could in fact make all the others advance? It might be climate action, it might be no poverty. I will like to go back to this question at the end of my presentation because I believe it sums really well how we can mix Tolstoy and responsible sourcing. That's the first history that I'd like to share with you. The second one, it happened when I was serving as president of the European Federation of Geologists. So I was there between 2013 and 2019. And my background is in mining. And in those years, there was a big discussion about responsible sourcing. So the Americans had the Dodd-Frank Act, and they were already implementing under the Obama administration some guidance to avoid minerals that were coming from conflict areas. So the discussion at European Parliament was ongoing, and in 2015, when the EFG realized that, we joined other groups that were lobbying the European Parliament to advance a regulation that aiming to curb the imports of minerals from conflict areas. And I would say that we were very successful in that. The image that everyone had was of these poor miners, many of them exploited by armed groups. And I was saying that we were very successful collectively because in 2017, in the 16th of March, the regulation was approved. And that regulation basically defined conflict areas, and it only entered into force this year in 2020. But one of the goals was, in fact, to prevent the imports of these minerals coming from conflict areas. One of the areas that was targeted by the regulation was the Democratic Republic of Congo. So it just happens that I was never in Congo before March 2017, but later that year and the next year I visited DRC several times. And to people who has never been in Congo, first it's difficult to understand how big the country is. The country is huge. It's basically half the size of the 28 European countries all put together. So it's very big, and it has no infrastructure. So you don't have a road connecting the two biggest cities in the country. So you need to rely on airplanes. You have a lot of jungle, and for those reasons, I mean, for the lack of infrastructure, you have many regions with that are ruled by warlords. In fact, there are more than 200 armed groups in the DRC, and just in Kivu, North and South Kivu, an area roughly the size of Austria, there are more than 60 armed groups there fighting, and they are using the minerals to fund their fight. So going to the DRC for the first time at the end of 2017, I was expecting this sort of environment, And what I found in the field trip was something completely different. So what I found, I was visiting the south of the country, the Katanga province, and their mining was being made by farmers. So it's something that I'm from Portugal. It's something that I remember my grandparents telling me about the 30s and the 40s in Portugal, when there was a huge rush for tungsten, and many farmers were in fact looking for tungsten that they were selling to suppliers. So this is happening now in Congo, in these regions. So you see farmers that are going to mine sites with their families because they don't leave the children or the women behind, because they can be raped or kidnapped or attacked by other men from other villages or armed groups. So the whole family goes to the mine site, the whole family works there, and before the approval of the European Union regulation, they could make up to, let's say, $15 a day by collecting the minerals and selling them to buyers. After the approval of the EU regulation, many buyers left the country. So the Americans were already leaving, the Europeans also left, and the only ones who remained were the Chinese and the Lebanese. And as you can imagine, less buyers means less demand. Less demand makes the prices go down. So a family that was making $15 a day before was now making $5 a day, and they was just made poorer because of the European Union regulation. And of course, this is not what we were aiming at. So it was like a surprise to realize that we should have a different approach. So is there hope? So I believe, yes, that there is hope. And there is hope because we have several certification schemes. This table represents many of them. Some of them are covering the whole supply chain. Others are more focused on the mining or on the manufacturing stages. But the good news is that we have this in place, but there are still many weak points. And as was just mentioned before by Tom, sometimes you need to have some sort of expertise to understand if what is coming from this mine is what is going to that smelter. And I believe that technology can give a huge help to this. Technology, of course, based now in blockchain and also digital tags, can be a solution combined with the reporting and certification schemes, but it's probably not the solution. Going back to Tolstoy, now is where I link both things. Remember that the Anna Karenina principle exists because of the first quote of the book, the opening sentence from Tolstoy. So all happy families are alike, but each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. Meaning that if you fail in covering one specific factor, then all the one possible deficiency, all your endeavor may be doomed. I mean, may fail. People working in statistics or in management is probably familiar with that, but basically this means that whatever the scheme that you have or whatever the system in place, if there is a deficiency, a possible deficiency, then it will probably fail. So we need to address this, and in my opinion, the solution can come from the answer to this question. So in this meeting in Geneva that of the expert group on resources classification, many people was pointing partnerships as the sustainable development goal that was capable of leveraging all the others. Climate action was also something that was pointed by many, but a factor that also had some sort of alignment around it was responsible consumption and production, the Sustainable Development Goal number 12. Meaning that if we manage to have sustainable and responsible consumption, and again, because consumers are the ones that are driving the manufacturers, and if consumers are aware on the origin of the products that are incorporated on the gadgets that they are buying and using, this can make a difference. So in my opinion, the challenge is clear. We need to engage in the supply chains, responsible sourcing. We need to engage consumers, and it's effective engagement of consumers that can, in a way, balance the deficiencies that the systems might have. And this is in line with the Anna Karenina principle. Thank you, Sarah.
Brilliant. Thank you very, very much, Vitor. That's fantastic. And yes, as per usual, you can hear that applause raining out behind those microphones. Just before I go to the questions, just to give a bit more time for some of them to filter in, because there's some really good commentary coming in at the moment. Do you want to just explain what the World Barometer is? Because this is fabulous and it's something that has come up previously during the conference so far.
Oh, yes, of course. So you have it now on the screen. So this is a news digest, and it's provided by the International Raw Materials Observatory. The observatory in itself is the outcome of an European Union funded project, and the European Federation of Geologists was the lead partner of this project. And the aim was to create some sort of non-profit organization capable of collecting information and providing and sharing best practice between different countries and organizations. So the observatory is doing that, and we are providing for free this bi-weekly digest of news, but we are not focused on news coming only, let's say, from the industry or from the environment or from the sector. In fact, we are covering a wide spectrum of news, because we realize that sometimes you have factors that are coming from science or from politics, like let's say the China-US trade war, that can affect everything. It can affect your supply chain, it can affect your mining process, it can affect your business. So this World Barometer is provided for free. You can just go to the intro website and you seek that, or you just Google World Barometer and you find it, and you can just subscribe, and you'll be receiving every 2 weeks news that might have impact, about factors that might have impact on the mining industry.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Vitor. I think this is something here where Anna's Ludovine is just saying on the chat, and this demonstrates how absolutely necessary it is to avoid that silo-based thinking, and because that's often, kind of promotes that weakest link in the process, and that's where the entire process falls over. Are you seeing more effort to avoid this amongst international organizations and other stakeholders working on these issues, so that trying to avoid the silo-based thinking, is there an active move towards that at the moment?
Well, to be honest, no. And that happens at all levels. At the intergovernmental organizations level, you can see that. I remember seeing this morning a presentation about a United Nations system that was endorsing a certification scheme, the development made by our colleagues in South Africa. And at the same time, this group that is developing this expert group on resources management that is working with UNES, so the United Nations European Commission, United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, UNES. It's also dealing with the management of resources. So there is not much communication. We see this also at European Union level. Sometimes DG Trade, it's not aligned with DG Grow. DG Trade is seeking some sort of, let's say, problems, thinking more on their own silo, and Growth is thinking on the industry. And it's quite common. So this is one of the reasons why it's important to have this sort of digests, because you can go there, you can just realize that something that is happening, let's say, on the energy might have an influence on the technology that you are using to mine. Mm-hmm. And this is important.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I mean, I think this is something where, as you just mentioning, so there are so many different groups, many of whom never speak to one another, or when they do, they misinterpret perhaps what the other group is trying to say, or the true intent of what they're trying to say. And in something like Europe, of course, you've got lots of people who are trying to communicate when we all speak different languages as our first language. So trying to interpret what someone is really trying to intend can be very, very difficult. And it takes a lot of patience, I think, perhaps sometimes, to really understand what another person is trying to say. And something actually with that, in terms of misinterpretations, perhaps. So I was recently in the south of the Democratic Republic of Congo, working with some of the artisanal miners there. And this is actually quite a nice segue across into Sarah, who's coming up with the next talk. And this was something where those miners themselves, they are professional miners. They're just using different tools to what a large mining company might utilize. So you've got this spectrum from the artisanal and the small scale mining all the way through to the large scale mining. And it's interesting because I think whilst there's a huge amount of work that's been going on to try and understand different factors with regards to the different types of mining that goes on, there's again lots of misinterpretation with regards to that. Now we've got a talk on Friday from Estelle, who will be giving us a really nice overview with regards to what is artisanal mining, and I think that Sarah will be doing some of this in a second. But just with regards to your time in the DRC, Vitor, so obviously you were seeing people who perhaps their primary mode of actually getting money, for example, was farming, but then there was this opportunity of mining. How do you think that's been changing? How do you think that's changed over the years?
Well, I was there doing an assessment for the World Bank of a mining project. And I must say that I don't see artisanal miners as the enemy, quite the opposite. I do believe that artisanal miner, in a way, is a more fair way of, let's say, sharing the benefits of mining. Because I also recognize that effective mining, I mean, to exploit resources in the most effective way, you need to have some sort of professional organization with equipment, knowledge, and people that artisanal miners cannot cope with. So, but combining the two, and Burkina Faso is one of the African countries that is doing that in a very effective way and successful, I would say, it's the best way, because then you can have the most effective way to exploit resources, and in a way to have exports and to have all this normal supply chain working as we know it in Europe. And at the same time, you can have like almost a fair social mining site, which they don't exploit much, but there is many people that depends on that. So the number of families is huge. Some countries, they are fighting artisanal miners like the enemy. And I don't believe this is the right approach. Also, what is of course needed is a clear legal framework and access to land, so you can, as a miner, know what you can count on, and people there can also understand what are the rules and what they can and they cannot do.
Brilliant. Thank you very, very much, Vitor. And I think what you finished on there is hugely important. So we're not talking about us and them to any stretch, in any stretch of the imagination. All of us are wanting to make responsible use of the raw materials in the ground, and it doesn't matter what our backgrounds are, etc. I think it's a case of the more we can share our perspectives and our ideas, perhaps the more successful the outcome can be. So brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Another round of silent applause for you. Brilliant.